Connor just got back from Nashville. I guarantee he saw a
White Claw?
He saw a bachelorette party with White Claws everywhere.
No laws there, Connor. Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South with us on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. What is up, Connor? We gave you a lot there before we brought you on.
Guys, do we want to just talk about the power ranking of bachelorette party vehicles in which you could be transported around downtown Nashville? Because I was naive. I was innocent. I kind of assumed that I was going to be looking at a lot of different party buses and that was kind of going to be the norm. Man, we got tractors. We got fire trucks. We've got like Humvees that you could be taken around in. They literally have everything in downtown Nashville. If you don't see a bachelorette party in like 20 seconds walking around downtown Nashville, like you're just not looking. You probably have your head looking at the sidewalk or something. It's unbelievable. I've never seen anything like
see it.
Yeah, and it's been over the last decade. It's really weird, Connor, how that became bachelorette party capital of the world.
Yeah, and look, I can't say that I've been able to partake in one of those. We had a great time being able to get out on Broadway on Saturday night post half marathon. But it was one of those things that, man, like you just realize like there's just no place that's really like this. The only place that I've seen that's kind of like that was Times Square in New York. Other than that, I mean, I was really struggling to come up with any sort of comp.
Yeah, if you're the type person that turns around every time you hear a group of girls go, woo, that's not the place for you because your head's on a swivel there the whole time. The woo girls are out.
The woo girls.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's a great time. I don't fault anybody. It's one of those things too. Like when you're like walking around, or if you're in a car and you're watching other people who are in that spot, you're like, oh, they're hammered. Those are so like touristy. You know, they're a little bit cliche or whatever. I bet they're an absolute blast. I bet they're a great time, and I will not be the person to hate on the woo girl because I'd probably be the woo guy if I was on one of those things.
Technically, I am that for the show. I am
the woo guy.
The woo guy.
Go read Connor's work Saturday Down South. Hear the, what was it, an hour long sit down with Dunaway? I mean, I don't find Jim that interesting, yeah. Connor. That must be great questions by you.
It was long answers.
Long answers.
It was
okay.
3 questions, 50 minutes.
We've tweeted out where you can find that with Connor's latest podcast there with Dunaway. Let's talk spring games. Connor O'Gara with us on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. We just played sound from Brian Kelly, and he's describing all 4 quarterbacks. And when he got to Jayden Daniels, I thought this was interesting because he started the game, and I would say he's the presumed starter. He said, and Jayden is really fast, which is a compliment. But also, if it's a starting quarterback, you want more than really fast. And I don't mean that Brian Kelly intentionally is saying that, but I just thought it was a weird comment.
I think Brian Kelly should just have a filter, somebody that is just on call at all times to just be on standby to sort of kind of be like, hey, do you really want to say that? Do you really want to send this tweet type of thing? Because as you recall his comments with Keishon Butte, where he's like, well, I know his last name now. You're like, yeah. Wait a minute. That's one of the 3 best receivers in college football. Why would you say that when he's already talked about entering the transfer portal? Look, I think Brian Kelly is trying to kind of walk that line. He wants Garrett Nussmeier to stay at LSU. I mean, that's a big topic of conversation. That May 1st deadline is coming up. So you're trying to downplay this. We didn't see Jayden Daniels get a ton of reps. We knew that it wasn't going to be like, hey, he's really going to take over and look the part because let's be honest here, he hasn't had a lot of time in the system. And Miles Brennan, I thought, is able to kind of step in and have that advantage over him. But I think he's trying to keep all 4 of those quarterbacks around. I think the Jayden Daniels move was made in part because he wants to keep Garrett Nussmeier on that roster. And I think so that's part of it. Jayden Daniels is going to have time to learn the offense, but it's still raw. And if you talk to people who watched him closely, somebody like Matt Berry at ESPN, who's a diehard Arizona State fan, they'll tell you, like, look, he has some tools that are really, really impressive, and you can work with that, but he needs time to be able to develop that trust with that really good group of receivers. And right now, Brian Kelly clearly doesn't want to kind of give him the credit for necessarily being like on the same page with all these guys and looking like an all-world starter.
So you did a piece yesterday on don't bet on the 2 preseason Heisman Trophy favorites. Instead, consider these 5 candidates. I like some of your 5 candidates. The thing I would ask you, your 2 favorites, Bryce Young, the guy that is your reigning Heisman Trophy winner, and C.J. Stroud. Did you realize the last time, and maybe you put this in your article, last time somebody from the Big Ten won a Heisman Trophy?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're talking about Troy Smith here.
Yeah.
Like, it's
2006. And Heisman Trophy voters like to go against the grain. And I'm just wondering if C.J. Stroud has the year a lot of people believe he's going to have. I wonder if they go that direction just because somebody from the Big Ten hasn't won one in a while.
It's a terrible bet.
Well, yeah, it's almost even money. I agree with you. I agree.
Like betting 2-1 on a college football player to be the best individual in the entire sport, when part of this, and I'm not saying that this is fair, but this is just the way that it is played out. And you see these patterns with voters. Like CJ Stroud and Bryce Young are competing against themselves, which is a ridiculous standard to have to hold up to. I have a Will Anderson rant that we can get into about why he's competing against his 2021 version of himself and how messed up that is, considering he should have been a Heisman finalist last year and he somehow wasn't. And that could hurt him this year in a weird way. But the thing with CJ Stroud that I come back to is like, is he really going to be able to better his numbers? And is it going to be somebody that captivates the nation? That's the way the Heisman Trophy has typically gone. And even with somebody who is kind of a returning commodity like Baker Mayfield, who is one of 2 players in the last 13 years to start off as a preseason top 3 Heisman vote getter, I guess 3rd because Bryce Young joined that club as well, but to go on to win the award. And Baker Mayfield took his game to that next level. Is CJ Stroud going to do what he did last year? Because he's got less talent at receiver. I'm sorry. I know Jackson Smith and Jigba is arguably the best returning receiver in college football. He still lost 2 guys who are probably going to come off the board in the first round of the NFL draft with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. So I would look at that and say, you know what? Especially looking at those odds, 2-1, that's terrible. I don't know if he can really have that Heisman narrative just based on that, especially with how good we've seen Ohio State quarterbacks play and still not even get that kind of love.
I think there's a rule that eventually we have to give Oklahoma quarterbacks another Heisman Trophy. We're almost up to that quota. And Jeff Lebby comes in, and every time I watch Herb Street talk about Jeff Lebby, I think he's talking about the beautiful mind of X's and O's, right? Apparently this guy calls plays better than everyone else. So if you take Lebby, give him his old quarterback from UCF, and put him at Oklahoma, that seems to be the perfect recipe for a Heisman candidacy.
You know what's weird? I don't think Dylan Gabriel is competing against past Oklahoma quarterbacks like Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts, and Kyler Murray in a way that Spencer Rattler actually was, and that kind of led to his benching. Because it's a new regime, because Lincoln Riley is no longer there, I do think that Dylan Gabriel, reunited with Jeff Lebby, can follow this sort of Heisman narrative as kind of this new guy, this Oklahoma following this storyline of, well, we didn't need Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams. We can do it in a different way, because they're going to be leading in a lot of these games. I think Brent Venables coming back with a defense that ranks in the top 15 in percentage of returning defensive production, the great stat that Bill Connolly puts out every single year. I think having that is going to be a huge asset for that Oklahoma team in a Big 12 that looks very up for grabs. And I'm high on Baylor coming into the season, but it's still very much up for grabs. So I actually think Dylan Gabriel going to a Power 5 conference where he's going to get more eyeballs on him coming off of the injury last year can kind of follow that Heisman narrative. This is somebody who had a 32-4 TD-INT ratio the last time he was fully healthy back in 2020, reunited with Jeff Lebby. I'm really interested to kind of see the way that plays out. And I think that his odds at 40-1 are a lot better than some of these favorites.
What do you think? Connor O'Gara is with a Saturday Down South, JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline. If it doesn't work for Brent Venables, why would it not have worked in your opinion? I mean, what do you think goes wrong where they look back and say, okay, this was a bad hire?
You just don't fully know how these guys are going to act as head coaches. Like that's a really broad thing, and it's so general, but is he going to default to some of these principles that Dabo has, where like Dabo is stubborn to a certain extent with things like the transfer portal? Like obviously we haven't seen Brent Venables take that approach. We're just talking about a transfer that he added, who's a somebody that I like in the Heisman Trophy conversation. But at the same time, like, is he going to be stubborn to a fault?
Yeah, because
if he loses Jeff Lebby?
Yeah, real quick, Dabo has the viewpoint, Connor, that you would assume Mac Brown and Nick Saban would have. You know, the 2 oldest coaches in college football, you would assume they view things the way Dabo does. Dabo's like the old guy in the room all of a sudden.
It's kind of weird. And he's not that much older than 50.
I know.
Like, we don't really know what Dabo's coaching tree even really looks like yet. because we're finally seeing Tony Elliott get out there. We're finally seeing Brent Venables get out there. And we have massive questions now about Dabo moving forward, but we don't know kind of the way that his coaching tree is going to act. I think we have a general idea about like what Nick Saban's coaching tree looks like. And you can kind of go any which way with that. If you want to point to the Will Muschamps, the Jeremy Pruitts of the world, the guys who have flamed out, you could say, well, it hasn't really worked out because they've tried to be Saban 2.0. But then you could also look at somebody like Billy Napier, who I would be buying stock in right now because of his Saban-like qualities. Somebody who also came from the Dabo tree, and you would say, all right, well, maybe, there are different ways to kind of look at this thing overall. But yeah, if Brent Venables doesn't work out, it's going to be because they couldn't figure out the offense, and because he had maybe some stubborn tendencies as a head coach and handling probably quarterback battles and things like that.
You can make an argument Hendon Hooker's second best quarterback in the SEC behind Bryce Young. You've got him on this list at 60-1, which are really good odds. But what do you think it would take if he had an outstanding season again and even better numbers to get him to New York, Tennessee win-wise? How many wins?
If he goes 9-3, there's room for that. Let's keep in mind this belief that you have to be going to the playoff to win a Heisman Trophy isn't true in this internet age. And I think Johnny Manziel proved that. I think Lamar Jackson proved that. We've seen RG3 prove that. Like, you can kind of go viral in different sort of ways, and Hendon Hooker has the ability to do that. I love this little head fake that he often does when he gets into the open field, and he has, the ability to make guys miss with his legs. I think that he has room to grow as a thrower as well. And so, those explosive plays are going to be there, but it comes down to this, guys. Like, the reason he was kind of overlooked last year, despite the fact that he had a 31-3 TD to INT ratio, he was one of the best running quarterbacks in the country. He's got to win 2 of those 3 marquee games, I think, to really make that strong case. If he wins 1 of those 3, and the 3 that I'm talking about, of course, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, you've got to end those droughts. If you're at Tennessee and you're getting that kind of billing, you've got to be able to win 1 of those games for sure to be in the conversation, and then probably 2 of those games to kind of have a realistic chance to win the award. And I like what they're doing from an offensive standpoint. I think he and Cedric Tillman are going to be a fantastic duo. So I think that's really kind of where it's got to be. And then Tennessee getting that maybe 9-3 regular season would be huge for his chances.
We look forward to buying you a beer over in Atlanta when it's Georgia and Alabama the first week in December. But if it's not them, which concerns you more, the Alabama offensive line or the Georgia defensive backfield? You write a story today at Saturday Down South about that. But which is the bigger concern for those championship contenders, Bama's O-line or Georgia's DBs?
Georgia's DBs, because at the end of the day, with Alabama's offensive line, the struggles and the head-scratching moments that we saw play out last year, where they allowed, 41 sacks, and they were bottom 10 in the country in that department. And they didn't really look like they improved a whole lot, losing Evan Neal to the NFL, of course. And then they're getting Tyler Steen, the tackle from Vandy. You still have Bryce Young back there, right? Like, you still have him to kind of be able to improvise if the tackle can't win a one-on-one matchup. And you still have the best player in college football on the offensive side of the ball being able to kind of figure things out. Whereas Georgia, I worry about that secondary, because last year the secondary issues were covered up by the fact that they could get home with 3 or 4. And on the back end, they kind of had some issues that were covered up. And this year, man, they got Keely Ringo, the national championship hero. But outside of that, man, like, it is rough. And Kirby's been really upfront with the lack of cornerback depth that they have. They lost a few guys to the transfer portal. They've lost guys to the NFL draft. They just lost Darian Kendrick to the NFL draft. And it looks like, man, if you just decide we don't want to pick on Ringo, we'll just go in an opposite direction. Like, you can maybe get a chance to beat this Georgia team if they're not getting home consistently with 3 or 4. So I think it's definitely the Georgia defensive backfield that would have me more concerned if I'm picking one of those 2 teams to win it all.
All right, go follow Connor on Twitter at CJ O'Gara. You can hear the SDS pod, the Saturday Down South pod, with Dunaway as the guest. It's great anytime.
Actually, it's a big Oreo cookie. A lot of good stuff around my ooey gooey middle part.
So there. Connor's intro and outro is the good part. Gotcha.
Yes. Good debates on either side.
That's right. So you can check that out. We've tweeted it from the next round and read him at Saturday Down South. Connor, thank you for the time. Always great talking with you.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, guys.
All right. Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South with us on the JohnstonRVCenter.com hotline.